Thank you for tuning in to the Helium Radio Network. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
Welcome to the Insurance Sucks podcast. Yeah, we know it sucks, but you have to buy it, and you probably don't have the smarts to figure out what you need or where to find it. That's why you should listen to Eric and Daryl, brought to you by QuoteSavage.com.
Hello, and welcome back for another episode of Insurance Sucks, brought to you by the great folks over at iInsure. If you're looking for any type of insurance coverage, check them out, iInsureNow.com. I'm your co-host, Eric Remble, joined by
Daryl Stidham.
And welcome back. And today we're going to be talking about auto insurance changes in the state of Florida. We've got some exciting news for everybody out there that's tired of high insurance rates, or any medical or legal practitioners that are just tired of fraud and all kinds of craziness going on. The Florida legal system has passed some new legislation going forward and some new changes. And I think, Daryl, you're super excited about yourself as an agent, aren't you?
I'm very excited. I'm most excited for the consumers of the state. Now, to be fair, at this point in time, the Florida Senate has passed the bill. It is now headed to the Florida House for their vote. So hopefully they do the right thing and they pass this. And what this bill is it's a repeal of the Florida no-fault law.
Now, what is that? So for folks that I know, I don't have an exact number off the top of my head, but I think there's about 7 or 8 states, somewhere around there, that still have a no-fault law in place. There's not many left, but if you're in a state that doesn't have a no-fault, can you tell us what that actually means, Daryl?
Yeah. So no-fault basically, and the common misconception is people think, well, if there's a no-fault law, that means if I get into an accident, they're not going to assign fault. That's not true. The no-fault law is literally about medical bills. So in Florida, our no-fault law states that the first 80% of your medical bills up to $10,000 is covered by your own insurance. And after that, you go into MedPay or uninsured motorist or the other driver's liability, right? And so what the state is trying to do is remove that PIP, the personal injury protection, from auto insurance policies, and put in a mandatory level of bodily injury liability going forward. Also in Florida, there's the misconception that you need to carry bodily injury liability. That's actually not true. Yes, you can get your car registered without liability, but if you get in an accident without liability, the state can revoke your license until you get a waiver of liability signed by the person that you injured. Fun fact, I was hit by someone that didn't have liability insurance, and his waiver of liability is still sitting in my desk 6 years later.
Who in their self-respecting or their who would do that? Who would sign you're waiving liability for the other party that hit you? Because who knows, you could develop a problem a year down the road, 2 years down the road, 4 years down the road. You never really know in a car accident. All kinds of things can happen. Exactly.
So I'd still at my desk. I assume at this point he's probably gotten his license back, but he had to go the hard route and carry an SR22, which is basically financial responsibility, or it's an FR44 financial responsibility tag on his license or his insurance, which means he had to carry 100, 300 liability for a couple of years until that was over and done with to get his license back. So he may have thought he was saving money.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to ask, so does that mean that he was trying to save a couple bucks by not getting appropriate coverage? And because he didn't get the appropriate coverage, which probably would have been a nominal fee, he's now paying 2-3 times the insurance rate because of that?
Yes, that's exactly what that means.
Wow. Well, it's kind of shocking, and it's kind of an eye-opener too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. People think, I'll save a few bucks by getting the lowest limit possible. And the reality is, and it's a couple of my insurance agent friends and I, we refer to it as the 10-20 hole. So if you carry the state minimum, which is 10-20, your insurance rates will never, ever, ever go down. But if you start stepping up to get those higher limits, eventually your rates will start to reduce. So you can carry better insurance for less money than you can carry the state minimum. So food for thought for everybody out there that's trying to save a buck. Bite the bullet for 6 months, get higher limits, and then you can start saving some money.
Yeah, absolutely. So, going back to like we were talking about before with the liability limits and the new PIP law that's going through and changing. So we're looking at, potentially some time left, right? Because I mean, like this is just food for thought. There's nothing guaranteed yet, but we've already passed the Senate. We're waiting on the House to pass it. Is there any realistic expectation that will happen this year? Or do you think it's something that's going to take years to come to fruition?
They've been trying for about 7 years to pass a bill like this. I think if there was ever a shot, it would be this year because of the insurance crisis that we're facing in the state of Florida, mostly for homeowners insurance. But I think everything comes into play. And so I think there's a added emphasis on getting insurance reform done this year.
Well, 100%. In a past life, I worked in the personal injury field, and I've worked on both sides, on the adjuster side, but as well as owning a facility, a healthcare facility to help treat folks that were in auto accidents and workers' comp and slip and falls and things like that. And, in years past, obviously at my facility, we wanted to do everything above board legal in the white, or, black and white, nothing in the gray. But there were so many of our colleagues that, were just abusing the personal injury system, maximizing all the benefits, regardless of whether or not those folks were injured or needed the care. They would take advantage, and it just wrought with fraud. There were so many people that would fake accidents, or be insurance scammers, get in front of somebody and slam on the brakes and cause a rear end collision, and things like that. So I think over the years, all of us, legal law abiding citizens who have to carry this coverage are kind of, ready to do a little happy dance, because we're finally going to be able to eliminate a lot of that fraud in, the medical side, or in the fraudster side, the accident side, which will in turn, I think, reduce our rates, won't it?
It absolutely will. I was going through my policy this week. Actually, it was kind of fun because I carry decent coverage already. If they repeal PIP, I'm going to save $600 and change a year just by not having to carry PIP coverage anymore.
That's huge. That's a big savings.
That's a big savings. Yeah. And so for everybody out there that's listening, if you carry the 1020 or the no bodily injury liability, take this as your opportunity to go ahead and get better coverage. So instead of getting a rate increase, if this bill goes into effect on January 1st, 2022, you're going to get a rate decrease instead.
Yeah. Or even, obviously you're going to reduce your PIP, and you're going to, I think we haven't touched on it yet, but you feel like there's going to be a minimum liability coverage that's not required. Like instead of so much med pay or so much liability, they're going to increase the minimum to offset, what PIP is, covering now.
Right.
But even at increased limits of liability, even look at reducing deductibles, look at doing so many other things on your policy, because you could even increase your coverage, decrease your out of pocket, with deductibles, and potentially still save money.
Exactly. The biggest concern I hear from some of the legislators that don't want to pass this bill, or some consumer groups, is that they're afraid that it's going to increase auto insurance prices for 40% of the Floridians that either carry no BI or the state minimums right now, which is 1020. And they're right. It will, because they're going to have to go up in liability limits. Even though they would reduce PIP, they're still going to face that increase because of liability limits. And the proposed minimum liability in the state of Florida would be $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident. So it's you're going to double the minimum liability here in the state. So again, the golden opportunity is here right now. If this passes, to go ahead and take care of it, and then see that decrease your deductibles when we have the opportunity to. I'm going to tell you how expensive PIP is for some people.
Well, can I play devil advocate for a minute? Yeah. I just want to ask you a question. So, and I'm probably going to get some hate mail for this comment, but those 40% of Floridians that you just identified that will have to increase their coverage because they have the bare minimum, just what the law requires to drive. Chances are, and I'm just spitballing here, but chances are the reason why could be one, I think, of poor driving records. because of the fact that they've been in accidents before, or they have DUIs or something of that nature. Chances are they're not driving a brand new car. Chances are they're driving, a used older vehicle to keep their rates down. Could be wrong, but the second point I would also make to that is they could be lower income or lower wage. So they're trying to keep the cost as low as humanly possible. But if I'm looking at this from a big picture, I'm 10,000 feet away, aren't those the same people that are creating the issues with the lack of coverage? So if I'm fully insured, fully covered, and I have more coverage than I need, and I'm hit by someone who has the bare minimum, my insurance is going to have to pick up the difference as the law stands right now, and eventually the insurance companies will settle who pays what and how that all gets worked out. But in the root cause of things, holistic in a big picture, doesn't that scenario multiplied times millions of drivers is what increases the rates?
Yes. And one of the biggest fears is that people think that the people that have to get the higher limits, even though they're losing PIP, because the rates are going to increase, we're going to see more uninsured drivers in the state of Florida, which is honestly, it's a very big concern even for me as I'm looking at it going, I have people that hem and haw over $80 a month policies because they just can't afford more.
So maybe I've got a negative approach here, or maybe my understanding of the situation is a little skewed, because I've been in that situation. I've been in high school, I've been in college where I had to pay for my own auto insurance and I couldn't afford premium coverage. I've also worked a job where I drove on the road for 70 hours a week, and I have almost 10 auto accidents under my belt, none of which I was at fault at. I've been hit that many times because for 10 years I had a sales job where I was on the road driving all day. So I was just at high risk, being on the road. But what that has taught me is it's always better to spend a couple $100 a year and overinsure than underinsure or get the minimums. So my thought process in this whole picture is, yes, it's going to be financially struggle or financially tough for some folks. But if you can't afford that coverage and you can't afford a vehicle, if you can't afford an extra $40 to $60 a month to pay for insurance, you probably can't afford to do proper maintenance and proper care on your vehicle or a car payment. So maybe you just shouldn't drive.
Right. And it's funny you say that and you phrase it that way. So I was reading over the 122 pages of this bill, and they kept mentioning the privilege of operating a vehicle in the state of Florida. And they kept saying privilege, not right, privilege of operating a vehicle in the state of Florida. And I think that's where it comes down to. And this may seem elitist, it may come off as me being arrogant or whatever, but it ultimately is a privilege to be able to operate a vehicle, not only in the state of Florida, but in this country, right?
Yep.
Because you have to maintain it, you have to pay for it, you have to get the insurance for it, you have to abide by the laws. It is not a constitutional right. So I enjoy that they put that language in the bill. And it is just something where, the realities are going to step in, and we'll see. But overall, it's going to be great for everybody. And eventually, as time goes on, we're going to see premiums reduced to the point where people who maybe couldn't afford the insurance before will be able to afford it. And we could reduce the number of uninsured drivers in the state of Florida, which would be massive for everybody.
You're 100% accurate. And one of the things I was just thinking, and I wanted to share before we change, before we pause for a break is, think about the state of Florida. At one point, we used to have to pass emission tests, where we had to make sure catalytic converters and all these different pieces. It was a state, requirement. A lot of northern states still require that due to road salt and a lot of the other things that happen during the winter months up there. So, even if you live in a northern state, there's still way more maintenance that you could have to be paying for the privilege of driving. So even as Floridians, we have a lot of perks by living in Florida too.
Right. Exactly. And then there's one more aspect of this bill that I think is super important. I think most people are overlooking it. And that is under the current law, attorneys in the state of Florida, if you are in an accident, cannot sue for pain and suffering. The new law fixes that. So moving forward, if this bill passes, and this is a big if, but if it passes, if you are severely injured and you are in constant pain and you will be in permanent pain for the rest of your life, your attorney can now sue for pain and suffering moving forward.
I wish honestly, I wish that was a clause that was enacted retroactive. All the car accidents I've been in, I wake up in pain every day. I go to bed in pain every day. My hips always hurt. I've got 6 herniated discs in my back. So I'm in pain every day of my life. And if I had had the opportunity to get more of a settlement, in those particular cases, it would have benefited my life exponentially because I could afford to go get massages on the regular, or, get a personal trainer to help me strengthen those areas if I need be. There's so many things I could have done to help myself in my situation, with pain management. It would have been amazing, but unfortunately I couldn't.
Exactly. So I think that there's a lot of benefits to this bill. I think it's time to get this done. And honestly, Eric, I think we are the last state to have a no-fault law.
Are we really? I didn't realize we were the last one. I thought there were still a few left.
It was us and Michigan passed their bill 2 years ago, and so they are off the no-fault system now.
Well, it's always Florida. We're always the last to do everything, right?
Well, we're just a fun little weird state, man. That's the name of the game.
Because we're so laid back. We're always at the beach or in flip flops. We're not focusing on big picture stuff, I
guess. Something like that. I don't know too many native Floridians that spend their time at the beach.
That's true. Well, it's time for our first break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the new bill, talk about how you can benefit and some of the things you can do in preparation for these upcoming changes. But during the break, check out our sponsor, iInsureNow.com. Not the I like on your face, the letter I. So iInsureNow.com. Or give them a call, 813-600-5900. See if they can help you lower your insurance rates or get better coverage. And we'll be back after this quick break. Welcome back. You're listening to Insurance Sucks on the Helium Radio Network, brought to you by the folks at iInsure. Their slogan, "Life happens, I will protect you." We've got the what's your title? Are you the chief agent, the head guy in charge? Like, what's your title there, Daryl?
I wear so many hats. I guess I would be the agency owner, the agent, the end all be all, the alpha and omega of iInsure. Does that make sense?
the insurance guru.
Insurance guru. That's a good one. Yeah, the guru of insurance here.
And we're really benefiting from your insight here. And today's topic is we're talking about a new PIP repeal bill that's been passed by the Senate in the state of Florida, waiting for House. We think we're leaning towards passing. This is insurance reform that's been needed for quite a long time, and we think we're finally getting it. But before the break there, we're talking about some of the benefits of the bill and some of the language. And, I just want to reiterate the fact that, just like you pointed out, driving is a privilege. And so many people take advantage of that by doing things like driving drunk or driving, in uninsured vehicles or driving in vehicles that are unsafe to be on the road, or even things like, motorcycle riders, driving carelessly, speeding, doing all kinds of things on the road. And it's amazing to me how many things, we've had to pass laws to correct because of bad driving behaviors, like texting and driving. That would be common sense, right? You would think.
You'd think so. I almost got in an accident this week because of that.
That's crazy.
It wasn't me texting, by the way.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified.
Yeah.
Most of my vehicles up until, recently have been manual. So I've never really had the opportunity to text and drive because both hands are busy, both feet are busy. I'm focusing on driving. But it's amazing to me how many people are still putting on makeup and eating and reading and doing all some of the other things. They need to hurry up and perfect the self-driving technology like that Tesla has, so that we can all do whatever we want in the car and then not have to worry about
it. That would be nice. I still think we're probably a decade away from that, unfortunately. But
well, maybe we'll see it in our lifetime. In Florida, historically, from a local native growing up here, one of our biggest fears as kids was getting on the road with an elderly person because they were historically bad drivers. A lot of the lanes in and around where I grew up are tiny. There's no wiggle room. There's no shoulders. They're 2 or 4 lane roads that have little room for error, or little margin for error. And, as the elderly being what we used to call God's waiting room growing up, it's a retirement mecca here. There's tons of retiree villages and communities and homes. Obviously the elderly folks were what we were concerned with. If they do perfect that driving, I think that would be a worry no more. That would be great.
It'll be awesome. It reminds me of the South Park episode from must have been a decade ago, where the elderly drivers. We had a spurt where old people seem to run into buildings a lot, and so South Park made an episode about that, and it's still one of my favorite episodes to this day. The old drivers running into buildings and homes and just showing up in like horror movie stuff. It was a phenomenal episode, but it drives home the point that not everybody's a safe driver, right? And if you are no longer a safe driver, as painful as it might be, it's time to surrender your license.
Yeah, absolutely. Or the folks that have lost their license and still continue to drive, because of too many DUIs or too many, mistakes.
Those are my favorite. And unfortunately, we can't catch them unless they get pulled over again, right?
Yeah.
So
maybe one day they'll perfect a system where, that won't be needed, and there'll be other alternatives. But what always gets me is there's so many alternatives now between like Uber and Lyft and cabs and ride shares. And, depending on where you are, maybe not in Florida, but high-speed trains or, high-speed buses. There's so many ways to get around now that don't require you to drive that are pretty inexpensive. You could get pretty much anywhere in the Bay Area for $20 to $40 in an Uber, and the cost of $20 to $40 versus the cost of driving drunk and taking someone's life or losing your license or paying thousands upon thousands of dollars for, legal help and protection and all those things. $40 is a drop in the bucket,
Yeah, $40 compared to $10,000 if you don't injure anybody or run into something, versus $40. To me, it's a no-brainer, right? Just pay the $40 and be done. Don't worry about it anymore.
Yeah, and, talking about money and talking about the cost of things, what are some things that folks that are, listening to this podcast going, hey, I wonder if I'll need to change my policy limits, or, hey, I wonder, what's the best way to do this, or when should I do it? Do you have any advice for folks, things they can do now proactively to kind of look at their bill or get some feedback or think about what is coming? Because you said, January 2021 or 2022 is when it's proposed to go into effect?
Proposed January 1st, 2022.
Interesting. Okay.
So the biggest thing, I with emphasis, I'm telling you this, if you carry no bodily injury liability or you carry 1020 bodily injury liability, you need to increase those limits to at least 25,000, 50,000 bodily injury liability. Okay.
If someone wanted to do that now and just proactively be ready so that when the law changes, literally all they have to do is remove their PIP coverage. Is that cost prohibitive? Is it something that's pretty inexpensive if they even did it now?
There's a lot of variables that go into it, but for most people, you're probably looking at increasing your monthly bill $20 to $30 a month, right?
What would that liability coverage give them? Would that give them more protection if somebody who doesn't have a license hit them, or if they made a mistake and hit somebody else?
Indirectly, yes. So in Florida and most states, we have what's called uninsured motorist liability. And that is for someone that hits you that doesn't have any liability or doesn't have enough liability, right? But you can only purchase so much up to your bodily injury liability limits. Now, here's the quick and dirty version of this. If it says liability behind the name, the title of whatever coverage it is, it's for someone else. If it doesn't, then it's for you, with the exception of uninsured motorist liability. That is for you. So, so let's say you carry $10,000 in bodily injury liability, you can only buy $10,000 in uninsured motorist.
That makes
Make
sense.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you then, devil's advocate, wouldn't it make sense for me to make that change now anyway, since you can't, like you said, the new law that goes into effect in a year, basically, or 6 months, will allow you, the new law will allow you to sue for pain and suffering. That's not something that's available now. So wouldn't that make more sense to carry a higher liability coverage now in case someone doesn't have insurance? Or hypothetically, let's just say, we see a lot of carjackings lately. What if someone, steals a school bus or a dump truck or a semi and plows into you? You're obviously going to get more severely injured, because of the weight and size of the vehicle. And say it's a robbery, say it's someone who's drunk, say it's someone who, any number of things that could happen. Obviously, they're probably not going to have insurance or won't be covered. So in that scenario, wouldn't it make more sense to carry your own higher limits?
Yes. Well, 100%. I always, and people always ask me, I have a couple of renters on my books and they start off at like 25, 50 liability. And I kind of edged them up to 100, 300. They go, why should I carry this much? I'm like, so we can get you the uninsured motorist coverage on the back end, just in case. And 9 times out of 10, when I explain that to them, that you're denying yourself this coverage because you don't have higher limits on the other side, they go, oh, that makes sense. I want that coverage. I'm like, of course you do.
Well, yeah, because it's a no-brainer. If you can have more coverage, I mean, I'll give you a case in point. I've been involved. Like I joke, I say between 9 and 10 accidents. I've been involved in 10 accidents, but 9, one of them, it was so minor I don't really consider it an accident, like a bumper touch. Just grazed, if you will. But the 10 accidents I've been involved in, I think I have to go back and double check, but I think 4 of those people were uninsured, had no insurance, and then a couple of them were kids who ended up living on their own. So they were like on their parents' policies. They were not teenagers. I think one was 20, one was like 24. One was away at college, vacationing here in Florida. Another one was living on their own, but they had never changed their policies. So they were quote unquote still on their parents, but they were living in homes with people that had insurance. So there was like a gray area of like who covered the accident, how much was covered and things like that. And if it hadn't been for me carrying, I usually carry 2 to 3 times what the law requires. So most of my life I've carried 100, 300, or 50 or above. At least double the limits, and it's always worked out for me. So those accidents were more than covered. But if I hadn't done that, chances are I would have had to come out of pocket and either, gone into debt myself to have to pay for medical coverage. A couple times I was in hospital. A couple times I had to get, a few MRIs, and those MRIs aren't cheap. They're around $1,000 every time you get in a scanner. So things like that, I would have had to come out of pocket if I hadn't had that coverage.
Right. It's just so incredibly important. And again, talking about this bill going back, we could see an increase in uninsured drivers in the state of Florida, which makes the uninsured motorist coverage on your policy so much even more important than it already is.
Absolutely.
People don't insure themselves right. Agents don't always do the right thing. So making sure that you are properly protected is your best defense against awful, terrible things.
100%. Well, we're almost out of time today, so we got a few minutes left. If you want to give some tips on things that people can do, or it's just easier for folks to call your office and you can help them over the phone.
I'm always happy to answer calls at my office, 813-600-5900. But some things you can do quickly, look at your deductibles. $1,000 deductible versus a $500 deductible on your collision coverage might save you $3 or $4 a month. But if you get in an accident, you get an extra $500. So look at your deductibles. It's usually better to carry a little bit lower. $500 is about average. Bodily injury liability, get those limits up to as high as you can afford them, because eventually your rates will start to reduce, especially if your agent knows what they're doing. Hi, I'm Daryl. I know what I'm doing.
We hope, right? That's the whole goal.
I definitely know what I'm doing. And so, yeah, I mean, get the limits up on your bodily injury liability, bite the bullet for 6 months, and then watch those rates start to fall down.
That's awesome. That's good advice. Well, we're out of time for today. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, make sure you follow us on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, all your favorite platforms. If you could, go ahead and give us a star rating. If you like the show, give us 5 stars. Tell us about it. If you have any ideas of content you'd like to send, you can email Daryl directly. Daryl, what's the best email address for you?
That would be my name. It's Daryl, DARRYL at IINSURENOW.com. Daryl at IInsureNow.com.
And while you're there, if you want to request a specific podcast on something or even a policy review, drop them a line. Happy to help. And again, visit IInsureNow.com. They're a sponsor of this podcast, and we really appreciate them helping us out. So thanks for tuning in to another episode of Insurance Sucks. I'm Eric Reynolds.
I'm Daryl Stidham.
And we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to Helium Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and should not be construed in any way as advice from Helium Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by producers, writers, and editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the express written consent of Helium Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.